Baldur's Gate is a series that needs no introduction, and neither does Baldur's Gate 3, one of the most anticipated RPGs of the year. We just saw another hefty chunk of gameplay, and joining us to talk about it is game director and founder of Larian Studios, Sven Vinke. Sven, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Brandon. Nice to be here.
So Sven, let's just jump right into it because we just saw a bunch of new gameplay, and one of the things that I noticed every time we see gameplay of Baldur's Gate 3 is the interactivity in the environment, whether it's the verticality on display, jumping between ledges, gaining the high ground, hiding in shadows, picking up torches. I'm really, really curious. What does it take to create arenas and create environments that really have that level of interactivity? Is it something you plan for, or is it just something you'd say, "Oh man, it'd be cool if it did this"?
No. We planned for it for sure. When we started making the game, we wanted to give you that feeling that if you are creative with the systems that are given to you by the game, you can overcome any challenge. And so, obviously, to be able to achieve that, we had to give you lots of systems and we had to give you lots of challenge. And so when we started making the world, we thought about how can we give players opportunities for getting advantage, which is an important concept in Dungeons and Dragons, because it allows you to roll a dice twice. And so verticality was one of the very first ones that came to mind because it was very intuitive. If you see that you can get the high ground, it's logical that you'll get some kind of advantage over the enemy. So we started designing levels with verticality in mind. And then we started thinking about how can we change somebody who is at an advantage into somebody who is at a disadvantage, and that started bringing in elements of being able to destroy things like destroy a bridge on which somebody is standing, or being able for creating a stairs for yourself by moving a bunch of boxes so that you can get the high ground. So adding an element of dynamism to the entire gamescape, if you want. And then we started thinking further. So, okay, verticality is working pretty well. What else can we do? And that's how then our light and dark system came into place. So we said, well, if you're hiding, then you are going to be able to surprise somebody, which is also something that you have in the rule set. So how can we maximize the gameplay that's built around that? So we allowed you to manipulate the lights. We allow you to have dark vision. We allow you to hide better in the shadows. Which, if you're in shadows, you are what's called heavily obscured, which makes it hard for the enemy to see you. So we started putting all of those things together. We already had an environment in our heads that was going to be very dynamic. That you could move everything around, that you could destroy everything, you could put everything on fire. And so when you started combining all of these things together, you got a very big toolbox at your disposal with which you can change the odds of winning a battle, even if you are encountering a very big challenge. And so a lot of the gameplay is in the beginning teaching you the systems, then giving you challenges with those systems, and then increasingly making more complex tactical puzzles, if you want, in which you have to use your imagination to overcome an enemy that may be overwhelming at first, but by clever use of the environment, it's something that you can still win against.
Yeah, and we've seen that, especially with the deadly power of gravity on display in Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
But I want to talk for a second. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just that when verticality came into play, obviously pushing people off a ledge also became a very important factor in the gameplay.
Let's talk about the gameplay a little bit because we did see a chunk of it in February. We just saw another one, and there are some subtle differences. I think anyone that knows Larian Studios and knows your team knows that you guys really heavily favor community feedback as part of the driving element in development. When the gameplay first released in February, we noticed the narrator was speaking in past tense. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. In addition, there are UI elements that I noticed were differences as well. So it seems like you're moving further away from like the Divinity style of it. But can you speak a little bit about those changes, specifically the narrator one? Because I know a lot of people, it was a big focal point for the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, we like to change stuff. We like to iterate as we're building our games. We like to try out ideas on our community. So we always say the game that's going to go into early access is not going to be the game that's going to come out of early access, because there will be a lot of change, a lot of iteration. So the narrator, that was an experiment where if you picked one of the origin characters, you would be able to see things from the point of view from that origin character, but also in your responses or whenever a narrator note was necessary. And so that's how the idea of the past tense came to be. We liked it, but we saw that it wasn't super popular. So we did some further tests. We then tried out an alternate narrator, and that one seems to be going down much better. So that's present tense with one game master that's doing the talking. And so it's a little bit more traditional if you want, but it works very well also. So that's one example of a change. And I think that you will see many more as we enter early access, hopefully in the very near future. And the community will let us know what they like and what they don't like. And that's why we're going to early access in the first place.
Well, speaking of community feedback, there were a few other topics that the community were really passionate about. One of those being the initiative system. I know everyone's kind of used to that. Every character has their own individual system. Individual initiative system, but there are variants in Dungeons and Dragons for side initiative where everybody on the team gets to decide, when they go. And that seems like the route that you guys chose initially, but based on the gameplay that we saw, the demo that you just ran, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It seems like it's almost sort of a hybrid system. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So initially we went for the side initiative because we discovered that it worked really well in multiplayer. Baldur's Gate 3 can also be played in cooperative multiplayer. But there were downsides. But the fact that we made it allowed us to actually experiment with what we have now. So now you have a more traditional turn order, but if there's two or more of your own party that happen to be grouped together at a particular moment in the turn order, then you can just independently swap in between your party members. So if I, for instance, have a character called Shadowheart, and a character called Gale, and a character called Lysel, and they happen to be grouped together in the turn order, then I can first have Lysel do something, then I can switch to Gale, then I can go back to Lysel. And the advantage of that is that you can do much more combos that way. And that creates good gameplay, because finding combinations with the different things that you can have with the different classes is a large part of what makes this fun. And the really cool part is that because it's randomized and because there's a roll for your initiative, every single time you replay and you get into a new combat, you get different combinations. So you start discovering more of what combinations are possible than you would ordinarily discover, where you might actually always go back to the same combo. And so there's a lot of gameplay waiting for you there, and I think people will be pleasantly surprised by how smoothly that plays. So it's something that, I think that's the one that we're going to move into early access, and then we'll see how it works. But it's certainly working out very well for us.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, speaking of, the character... players being able to sort of write their own story and have multiple replayability. I know that Baldur's Gate does have tie-ins with the actual tabletop game as well, Baldur's Gate 3. You and I spoke about this a little bit earlier this year, but I wanted to sort of like come back to that topic because I thought your take on it was really interesting. Apparently that fans of both the tabletop, the story Baldur's Gate Descended to Avernus, which is the most recent adventure book from Wizards of the Coast, fans of that and fans of Baldur's Gate 3, they'll find that if they play more, there's a more fleshed out experience. Can you speak a little bit about how you worked with Wizards of the Coast in order to sort of tie threads between both media properties?
Sure. So when we were constructing the story of Baldur's Gate 3, Wizards was working on Descent into Avernus, so we got very early copy of Descent into Avernus. And actually, as a matter of fact, one of the principal writers on this, Adam Lee, came over to our studio in Ghent, Belgium, and we sat together for very long times discussing what his story was going to be, what our story was going to be, what tie-ins were going to be possible. So there's a lot of synergy that was created as Descent into Avernus was being built. And so as you'll play Baldur's Gate 3, you'll find a lot of that back. So there's places that are mentioned in Descent into Avernus that obviously you'll see in BG3. There's characters that you will find. There's things that happened, depending, of course, on how your tabletop campaign went in Avernus or in Elturel for that matter, that you are going to see in BG3 also. So, for instance, after the events in Descent into Avernus, tieflings who have the bloodline of the devils in them are not that popular anymore because the entire city went down to hell, and so several of them had to flee the city and are on their way to Baldur's Gate. And so they've when the story starts, you meet a group of those tiefling refugees that are trying desperately to get to BG3, to Baldur's Gate, not to BG3, and they tell you what happened in Elturel. So, and like this, you start discovering things of what happened there. There's strands of that story, and then when you get into BG, you see how the events that occurred in Elturel actually had an impact on the Sword Coast.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, as somebody who's played both, I know I'm going to be actively looking for little threads from Descent into Avernus in Baldur's Gate 3. But we have to go to a short commercial break right now. Stick around. There's much more Baldur's Gate 3 when we come back.